My son-in-law introduced me to the governor of Georgia as the man who mops the floors at Jefferson Middle School. What Ethan Prescott didn't know was that for 31 years, I'd been running covert operations for the Central Intelligence Agency in places that don't appear on any tourist map. 6 hours later, the Director of National Intelligence stood at the podium of the Prescott Family Foundation Gala and asked the room of 400 people to give a standing ovation to the man Ethan had spent 3 years calling the janitor. Ethan's father reached for his champagne glass and knocked it straight off the table. I'd spent 3 years sweeping hallways and replacing light bulbs at Jefferson Middle School in Marietta, Georgia. 3 years of my son-in-law telling his colleagues at Prescott Capital that his wife's father works in school maintenance. 3 years of watching my daughter smile apologetically every time Ethan made the introduction. He thought he was safely mocking a nobody. He was practicing his contempt on a man who had once negotiated the release of 17 American hostages from a cartel compound in the mountains of Colombia. That gala night, Ethan decided to go public with what he'd been performing in private for years. It was the worst decision he ever made. I need to explain how we got there, because the story didn't start at the gala. It started the first afternoon my daughter brought Ethan home to meet Carol and me. My daughter Sarah had been dating him for about 8 months at that point. She was 34, a cardiologist at Emory University Hospital, the kind of doctor other doctors call when they're not sure what they're looking at. I was proud of her every single day. She got her stubbornness from Carol and her patience from somewhere I can't take credit for. Ethan arrived in a silver Porsche and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His father, William Prescott, had founded one of the most successful private equity firms in Atlanta. His mother, Victoria, sat on the boards of 4 charitable foundations and attended the same church as 2 sitting senators. The Prescott family had been shaping Georgia's financial and political landscape for 2 generations, and Ethan had grown up understanding that this entitled him to a specific posture toward everyone he met. He shook my hand in the driveway. His eyes did a quick scan the modest ranch house, the 12-year-old pickup truck with the parking sticker from Jefferson Middle School still on the windshield, the grass-stained work boots I hadn't had time to change out of. "Sarah tells me you work at a school," he said. "Custodial services," I said. "Going on 3 years now." He nodded the way you might acknowledge someone telling you their dog died. Polite but fundamentally uninterested. "Good honest work," he said. The phrase that means exactly its opposite. Over dinner, he asked Carol what I'd done before the school. Carol looked at me. I looked at the roast chicken. "Government work," I said. "Nothing interesting." "Federal?" he asked. "Contractor. Mostly overseas. Boring stuff." Ethan accepted this and pivoted the conversation back to a deal his firm was closing in Charlotte. He spent most of the meal explaining to my daughter, who spent 12-hour shifts keeping hearts beating, what the real meaning of high-stakes work looked like. Carol squeezed my knee under the table. "Not yet," I communicated back. The second incident happened at Thanksgiving, 14 months into their engagement. Ethan had brought 3 colleagues from Prescott Capital for the holiday, men in their early 40s who wore the same expression Ethan wore, that careful blankness of people who are constantly calculating who, in the room, is worth impressing. I was in the garage when they arrived, fixing a cabinet hinge for my neighbor. I came in through the side door, still holding the screwdriver. Ethan's colleague, the one who'd introduced himself as the managing director of something, looked at me with genuine confusion. "Is this the handyman?" "This is my father-in-law," Sarah said. "Robert Hayward," I said, and shook his hand. "Bob does maintenance at one of the schools here," Ethan said, and the way he said it settled the hierarchy for the entire evening. I was the help, who happened to be related. During dinner, one of them asked about my background. Before I could answer, Ethan spoke for me. Bob had a quiet career before the school. Government paperwork, nothing that translated well to the private sector. He found his calling later in life. He picked up his wine glass. Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure environments. Some people are better suited to steadier work. There's real dignity in that. His colleagues murmured agreement. Sarah's jaw was tight. Carol, who has 31 years of practice, keeping her face perfectly neutral while everything inside her is the opposite, took a slow sip of sweet tea. I kept eating. After dinner, on the porch, my daughter found me watching the neighbor kids throw a football in the street. "Dad, I know. You could just tell him." "Tell him what exactly?" She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I, really. What I could tell him was classified at a level that would have made the conversation more complicated, not less. And there were still people in certain parts of the world who remembered my name for reasons that made my retirement a quiet matter. "Just ignore him," she said finally. "That's what I'm doing." "You're not ignoring him. You're waiting." She knew me too well for this conversation to go anywhere useful. The third incident was the one that changed the calculation. 2 weeks before the gala, Ethan's firm was honoring him as their rising star of the year. 400 guests, the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, a crowd that included the governor, 2 congressmen, 3 federal judges, and enough corporate money to fund a small nation's infrastructure. Ethan had been planning this event for months. It was less a celebration than a campaign announcement. He'd been telling anyone who would listen that he was considering a run for state senate the following year, and this gala was where that ambition was going to be unveiled publicly. I got a phone call from my daughter 3 days before the event. "Dad, Ethan wants to discuss seating arrangements." "All right. He's suggesting that you and Mom sit at table 19. Table 19 was near the kitchen entrance. I'd attended enough of these events to know what table 19 meant. He says some of the guests are, his word, sensitive about optics. Having someone from a, quote, non-professional background at the family table might send the wrong message to potential political donors. I let the silence sit for a moment. "What did you say to him?" "I said you are my father, and you will sit at the family table, or I will stand up during his speech and announce that I'm leaving him." In front of the governor. I almost laughed. There it was, she had more spine than he'd ever given her credit for. And he backed down. "But Dad, he's going to say something. I know him. He can't help himself. He's going to find some way to make a point in front of those people." "I know. What are you going to do?" I thought about the envelope sitting in my home safe, the one that had arrived 6 weeks earlier from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in Washington. The formal notification that certain elements of my service record had been declassified as part of the government's historical review of Cold War and post-Cold War operations. The one that meant my cover, maintained carefully for 3 years of retirement, was no longer a classified necessity. The one that meant if someone pushed me hard enough in front of the right people, I could finally answer honestly. "I'm going to let Ethan be Ethan," I said. Carol was standing in the kitchen doorway listening to my half of the conversation. When I hung up, she gave me a look I recognized. "You're going to let it happen," she said. "He's going to make it happen, whether I want him to or not." 31 years, Robert. She shook her head, but she was almost smiling. 31 years. I've waited for this. She had earned it, too. 31 years of Carol explaining my absences with phrases like, "He travels for work, and it's complicated government business." 31 years of raising our daughter mostly alone while I was somewhere I couldn't name, doing something I couldn't describe. She had sat with that silence and never once asked me to break it. She had watched Ethan perform his contempt for 3 years without flinching. She deserved a front row seat. The morning of the gala, strange things started happening. I was having coffee in the hotel lobby. We'd booked a room to avoid driving back to Marietta late at night when I noticed the 2 men near the entrance. Dark suits, the particular kind of posture that comes from years of physical training and tactical awareness. One of them had an earpiece. They weren't hotel security. I knew the difference. Ethan walked in from the parking garage and noticed my expression. He looked toward the men. "Friends of yours?" he said. With the tone of someone certain, the answer was no. "Probably here for a conference," I said. 20 minutes later, one of them approached me while Ethan was at the front desk. "Mr. Hayward? Agent Daniels, DNI Security Detail? We're coordinating your arrival this evening, per protocol from Director Walsh's office. We'll have 2 people stationed near the main entrance." I thanked him quietly. Ethan was watching from across the lobby. His face had gone the particular still of a man recalculating something. "Security protocols," he said when the agent walked away. "For a school janitor. Government retirement package is very thorough," I said, and went to refill my coffee. The second thing happened at the venue during the afternoon walkthrough. Ethan was reviewing the room layout with his event planner when a hotel manager approached me specifically, asking me to verify my full name and date of birth against a list on her clipboard. Official clearance list for a private firm's awards dinner. That wasn't standard procedure for anyone at table 12 or table 19. Ethan watched the exchange from across the room. "What was that about?" he asked Sarah. "I have no idea," she said. And she was telling the truth, because I hadn't told her about the declassification letter yet. The third thing was the envelope. A courier arrived at our hotel room at 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the gala. Ethan happened to be in the hallway when I signed for it. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock. In the upper left corner, the printed seal of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Ethan stared at it. "What is that?" "Correspondence. From the Office of the Director of National Intelligence." "That's what it says." He looked at me for a long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was almost visible, the encrypted-looking phone he'd seen me with, the federal agents in the lobby, the security detail protocols, and now this. The pieces were not fitting into the picture of a 64-year-old school custodian from Marietta. "Open it," he said. "It's addressed to me, Robert." He had never used my first name before. It had always been Bob, the diminutive, the informal, the small. If there is something going on that could affect tonight my career, my announcement, my family's reputation, I have a right to know. "Nothing going on will affect your career tonight," I said. "At least not in the way you're imagining." I took the envelope inside and set it on the nightstand. Carol picked it up, looked at the return address, and set it back down carefully. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," I agreed. The gala was everything Ethan had designed it to be. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom had been transformed into something out of a magazine, deep navy, linens, gold centerpieces, a string quartet near the bar. Atlanta's most influential figures filled the room in black tie. I spotted Governor Harrison near the entrance, deep in conversation with a man I recognized from congressional hearings. Federal Judge Patricia Wainwright was at the bar with 2 people I didn't know. Congressman David Albrecht was holding court near the window, and scattered through the crowd, people who knew me, not as the school custodian from Marietta, as something else entirely. Tom Reeves, former Deputy Director of Operations at Langley, now managing a private security consultancy. He caught my eye from across the room and gave a single nod. We'd worked together in Eastern Europe for 6 years. Margaret Okafor, now a senior State Department official, who had been a junior analyst the first time I'd pulled her out of a compromised safe house in Beirut. She walked toward me with her arms already open. "Robert Hayward." She hugged me. "I heard you were living quietly in Georgia." "That was the plan," I said. "Things change." She looked over my shoulder. "Is that your son-in-law?" Ethan was watching us from 6 feet away, with an expression that had stopped being confident sometime around the moment the DNI envelope arrived. He came over. "I don't think we've met." "Margaret Okafor, State Department." She shook his hand. "Robert and I go back a long way." "He's in school maintenance," Ethan said. The correction was reflexive, a tick he couldn't stop. Margaret looked at him with the careful expression of a diplomat deciding how much patience to extend. "Is that right?" she said. Not a question. She excused herself and moved on. Ethan grabbed my arm. "Who is she? How do you know a State Department official?" "Long story. Robert, what is happening tonight? I have the governor here. I have political donors. I have people who are going to decide the next phase of my career. And everywhere I turn, someone you apparently know is in this room. Enjoy your evening, Ethan." He let go of my arm. Something in his expression shifted from confusion to something harder. Ethan Prescott had built his identity on knowing exactly who was important and who wasn't, on reading a room and positioning himself accordingly. The fact that he couldn't read this one, couldn't place me in it with any certainty, was the kind of disorientation that turns careful men reckless. I should have anticipated what came next. I did anticipate it. I just underestimated the scale. Dinner was served. The speeches began. Ethan's father spoke first, the patriarch blessing the dynasty. Silver-haired and elegant, a man who measured everything in basis points and bloodlines. Then 2 colleagues from the firm. Then the governor offered brief remarks about Georgia's future and the young leaders shaping it. Then Ethan stood up. He was good at this. I'll give him that. He had presence, timing, the natural authority of someone who had been told his entire life that rooms were built to contain people like him. For the first 10 minutes, the speech was everything it was supposed to be: gratitude, ambition, vision, the measured revelation of his Senate Exploratory Committee. Then he looked at the family table. I saw it happen. The moment the calculation broke down and something meaner took over. He had been building towards something, and the confusion and displacement of the evening had sharpened it into something he couldn't keep back. I also want to say something about the people who shaped who I am, he said, and his voice had the quality of a man who believes he's being gracious when he's actually drawing a weapon. Family isn't just the people who share your ambitions. It's also the people who remind you where you came from. The people who live simpler lives and are content with that. Sarah's hand found mine under the table. My father-in-law, Robert Hayward, is here tonight. He gestured toward me. Robert has been a school custodian for 3 years. Before that, some kind of government work he's never been particularly clear about. Light laughter from a few tables. I think there's something important about having people like that in your life. People who are comfortable in a supporting role. People who understand that not everyone is meant for the spotlight. The room had gone slightly uncomfortable. This wasn't a toast. This was something else. So I'd like to raise a glass to the people who keep the floors clean while the rest of us do the work that actually changes things. He lifted his champagne. To the supporting cast. 400 people looked at me. Sarah was rigid beside me. Carol had set down her fork with a deliberateness that I recognized as the end of her patience. Tom Reeves, from across the room, raised his eyebrow a fraction of an inch. I stood up. The room went quiet in a different way. Ethan looked surprised. He had expected me to absorb this the way I had absorbed everything else, with the quiet dignity of a man who knew his place. "May I?" I asked, picking up my water glass. He couldn't refuse without making it worse. "Of course. I want to thank my son-in-law for that introduction," I said. My voice was calm. I had spent 31 years in rooms where staying calm was the difference between coming home and not coming home. This was the easiest room I had ever been in. He's right that I've spent 3 years keeping floors clean. And I want to tell you all something I've never said publicly. I reached into my jacket and set the D&I envelope on the table. I received this letter 6 weeks ago. It's a formal notification from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence that certain elements of my service record have been declassified. Until this letter arrived, I was not legally permitted to discuss what I did before Marietta. Ethan's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I spent 31 years as a clandestine operations officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. I served in the Special Activities Division, which is the paramilitary branch of the CIA's Directorate of Operations. My primary area of operation was counterterrorism and hostage recovery in Central America, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. The string quartet had stopped playing. 400 people were absolutely silent. During my career, I was involved in the recovery of 32 American citizens held hostage overseas. I served as station chief in 3 countries that I am now permitted to name: Colombia, Romania, and Lebanon. I was involved in the interdiction of 7 terrorist cells, planning attacks on American soil or American interests abroad. Ethan set his glass down. It made a small sound in the silence. I retired early for reasons that I'll allow the DNI's office to explain, since they're the ones who officially requested my cooperation with this evening. I looked toward the entrance to the ballroom. The doors opened. A woman in her early 60s walked in. Eleanor Walsh. I had worked under her predecessor, and under his predecessor. She had been confirmed as Director of National Intelligence 14 months ago and had sent me a personal note of congratulations when my declassification was finalized. She walked to the podium with the unhurried certainty of someone accustomed to being the most consequential person in any room. "Good evening," she said. "I'm Eleanor Walsh. I'm the Director of National Intelligence. I apologize for the interruption to your program." Governor Harrison stood up slightly from his chair. It was reflex. When the DNI walks into a room, you stand. I'm here because we had a scheduling conflict. I was already in Atlanta for a security briefing at Dobbins, and because Robert Hayward is someone the intelligence community owes a considerable debt. When his team informed me he'd be at this event tonight, I asked to come by. She looked at the family table. Robert, do you mind if I use your letter? I handed the envelope to a waiter who carried it to the podium. Director Walsh unfolded the document and set her reading glasses on. Robert James Hayward, Clandestine Operations Officer, Central Intelligence Agency, Special Activities Division, 31 years of service, Station Chief, Bogota, 1998 to 2003. Station Chief, Bucharest, 2004 to 2008. Senior Operations Officer, Beirut Station, 2009 to 2016. Retired 2021 under Mandatory Declassification Review Protocol. She looked up. The protocol that triggered that review was a routine one, but what it revealed was not routine. Robert is the architect of Operation Steadfast Ground, which dismantled a narco-trafficking network that had been funding 3 separate terrorist organizations with ties to attacks on American embassies. He personally led the extraction of 9 American hostages from a cartel compound in 2001, under conditions I am still not authorized to fully describe. She looked at the room over her glasses. He received the Distinguished Intelligence Medal in 2006, the Intelligence Commendation Medal in 2011, the Career Intelligence Medal upon retirement, and he received the National Security Medal, which is presented by the President of the United States and is the highest honor available to a member of the intelligence community in a private ceremony in 2019 for an operation the details of which remain classified. She folded the letter. Robert chose to retire quietly and take up what he described to his debrief officer as the most honest work available to a man who has spent 30 years lying for his country. He sweeps floors, he replaces light bulbs. He makes sure the kids at Jefferson Middle School in Marietta have clean hallways to walk through. Director Walsh looked directly at Ethan. I understand someone in this room has had some questions about who Robert Hayward really is. I hope this answers them. She stepped away from the podium and started a quiet applause that built slowly into something that filled the entire ballroom. Ethan had not moved. His father's face was the gray of a man watching his investment portfolio lose value in real time. His mother had pressed both hands flat on the table as if she was trying to keep the table from floating away. Sarah was crying, not sad crying. The other kind. Carol was not crying. Carol was watching Ethan Prescott with the expression of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and has just been repaid in full. I looked at my son-in-law. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You let me. He stopped. For 3 years. You let me. I couldn't have this conversation 3 years ago, I said. I couldn't have it a year ago. I could have it tonight because the government decided 6 weeks ago that my service no longer required concealment. You happen to pick tonight to make your point publicly. That timing is yours, not mine. I called you the supporting cast. His voice was barely audible. You did. In front of the governor. In front of several people who already knew who I was, I said. Tom Reeves over there ran Eastern European operations when I ran Latin American. Margaret Okafor, the State Department official you explained me to, was one of my assets for 2 years in Beirut. And Judge Wainwright prosecuted 3 indictments built entirely on intelligence, I gathered. Ethan looked around the room at the faces watching him. He was reading them now the way he had always read rooms, calculating status and influence. And what he was seeing was that every person in the room he had spent 3 years trying to impress had been looking at his father-in-law, to the school janitor, with a degree of respect that made his Rising Star Award look like a child's participation ribbon. Director Walsh was standing near the bar, accepting a glass of water from the bartender. Tom Reeves had made his way over to the family table and placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. Governor Harrison was looking at me with the particular expression of a politician recalibrating what this evening was going to mean to his relationship with federal agencies. I need some air, Ethan said. He walked out of the ballroom. Sarah watched him go. She did not follow. The night continued. People came to the table, some to speak to me, some to speak to Director Walsh, some just to stand nearby, in the way people do when they sense they're in the presence of something they'll talk about for the rest of their lives. The governor shook my hand for about 30 seconds longer than a handshake requires. Judge Wainwright sat beside me for 20 minutes and told me that 3 verdicts she considered the most important of her career had my fingerprints on the underlying evidence. Tom Reeves stayed until 11 o'clock. And we talked about people we used to know and places we used to be, and Carol sat beside me and listened to all of it with the expression of a woman hearing the full version of a story she'd been reading in fragments for 3 decades. Sarah came to find me near the end of the evening. She had been on the phone. I could tell by her face that the phone call had gone in a direction she'd expected but hadn't wanted to arrive at yet. "He's in the car," she said. "He wants to go home. You should go." "I don't want to go with him." "I know." She looked at me for a long moment. 20 years of doctor's training had given her a face that was very hard to read. But I'd been reading her face since she was 3 days old. 3 years, she said. He knew something was different. Those phone calls you got sometimes, the way you moved, the way you looked at rooms when we walked into them. He knew something wasn't adding up, and he decided to be contemptuous about it instead of curious. Yes, that's who he is. That's who he chose to be. She nodded slowly. She kissed my cheek and walked toward the exit. I watched her go and thought about the version of this evening where Ethan had been curious instead of contemptuous, where he'd sat across from me at that first dinner and asked me what government contracting meant, what overseas work looked like, what I'd given 30 years to, where instead of calculating my social worth in the first 4 seconds, he'd asked a question. Just one question. We never would have been here. But Ethan Prescott had never in his life understood that the most dangerous thing you can do to a quiet man is assume he's quiet because he has nothing to say. The consequences unfolded over the following weeks in ways that felt both inevitable and exhausting. The video went up within 48 hours. Someone at the gala had been filming, I think it was actually 3 different people. And the footage of Director Walsh at the podium, of Ethan's toast, of the moment I stood up, had been edited into something coherent and posted by Tuesday morning. By Thursday, it had 4 million views. By the following Monday, it had been picked up by 3 national news outlets. The headline that got the most traction was not particularly charitable to my son-in-law. Georgia banker mocks CIA veteran father-in-law at awards gala. The response was something else. Ethan's Senate Exploratory Committee dissolved before it had technically been formed. 3 of the major donors who had been at the gala called his father within the week. The calls were polite, but the message was clear. Supporting a man who had publicly humiliated a National Security Medal recipient on video, a video with 4 million views, was not a position anyone in Georgia politics wanted to occupy. His firm did not fire him. They reassigned him. The rising star of the year was moved from high-profile corporate acquisitions to a compliance review role that did not involve client-facing work. It was a demotion, dressed in procedural language. His father called me on a Wednesday afternoon. "Robert," William Prescott said, "I owe you an apology." "You don't. You weren't there for the previous 3 years." I knew he made those comments. I should have spoken to him. "You should have," I agreed. There was a pause. What he said at the gala was indefensible. It was a natural extension of 3 years of smaller, indefensible things. The gala was just the version he did in public. Another pause. "He's my son." "He is. And he's my daughter's husband, at least for now." That last part sat in the silence between us. "She's leaving him," William said. It wasn't a question. "That's her decision to make." "I know." His voice had the sound of a man swallowing something painful. I raised him to value achievement. I think somewhere along the way, he confused achievement with superiority. A lot of people make that mistake. You're being gracious. I'm being honest. It's a very common mistake. Usually it just doesn't get 4 million views. He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. Sarah filed for divorce 6 weeks after the gala. The marriage had been deteriorating for longer than the gala. She told me later that Ethan's treatment of me had been a window into patterns she'd been rationalizing for 2 years. The gala had simply removed the last excuse. She came to the school one afternoon, a Thursday. I was replacing a bank of hallway lights on the 2nd floor and sat on the floor beneath the ladder while I worked. "Does it make you sad?" she asked. That you're getting divorced? A little. I wanted your marriage to work. I mean the whole thing. 3 years of pretending. 3 years of him. All of it. I came down the ladder and sat beside her on the floor. A couple of 8th graders walked past us and didn't look twice at the old man in the maintenance uniform sitting on the hallway floor. Sweetheart, I was undercover for 31 years. I pretended to be 9 different people in 6 different countries. 3 years as a school custodian wasn't pretending. I actually am a school custodian. I know how to fix a light fixture. I know every kid in this building by name. I know that the bathroom on the east side of the first floor has a pipe that needs watching every winter. This is real. And the other stuff? That was also real. Both things can be true. She leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she had when she was 8 years old, and the dog died, and she didn't understand why things ended. Why did you never tell me, she said, about any of it, even after you retired? Because my retirement was conditional on maintaining low visibility. There were still people in certain parts of the world who would have found value in knowing where I was and what I cared about. The safest version of my life was the one where my daughter was a cardiologist who happened to have a father in school maintenance. Nobody targets a school janitor's family. She was quiet for a moment. You were protecting me. That was the job. Even in retirement. Especially in retirement. She stood up and brushed off her scrubs. She was working a late shift. She had a hospital full of people depending on her to be the kind of person who keeps showing up. Dad, she said. Yeah. Thank you for not being the kind of man who needed everyone to know. I picked up the ladder. I needed one person to know, I said. Your mother's been carrying that for 31 years. She earned the gala more than anyone in that ballroom. Things settled into a new shape over the following months. Carol and I kept the house in Marietta. I kept going to Jefferson Middle School on Tuesdays through Fridays, kept fixing what needed fixing, kept learning the names of new kids every fall. Director Walsh's office reached out with a consulting offer, reviewing cold case operational files, advising on training curriculum for new SAD recruits, the kind of quiet advisory work that an old man with operational experience can do from a laptop in a suburb of Atlanta. I accepted 1 day a week. The rest of the time, I swept floors. Tom Reeves called occasionally. So did Margaret, when her State Department travel brought her anywhere near the South. They were the kind of friends who required no maintenance. You could go 6 months without talking and pick up exactly where you left off, which is the natural result of having once trusted each other with your lives. Sarah's divorce was finalized in the spring. She moved into a new place in Decatur, closer to Emory, and threw herself into her work with the particular energy of someone who has set down something heavy and found they can move faster without it. She called me most evenings, which was new, and told me about her patients with the same care she used to hide when she thought I couldn't see it. She brought someone to the school to meet me one morning in May, a quiet man, maybe 40, who taught 8th grade American history at a public school in Cobb County. He drove a 10-year-old Civic with a bumper sticker from a national park I'd actually been to, once under circumstances I was still not permitted to discuss. He shook my hand and looked me in the eye and said, "Sarah's told me a lot about you, sir." I handed him a broom. "Help me finish the east hallway," I said, "and then we'll talk." He swept without being asked twice. We talked for an hour. He asked me about Marietta, about the school, about what I liked about maintenance work. He did not ask about the gala video, which he had clearly seen, or about the CIA, or about the National Security Medal. He asked if I thought the water fountain near the gym had always made that rattling noise, or if it was something new. I told him it was new, probably the intake valve. He nodded seriously. Good answer. That evening, Carol asked me what I thought. He's a history teacher who makes $43,000 a year, drives a car older than most of his students, and spent an hour helping me sweep a school hallway without once looking at his phone. Carol looked at me. "He'll do," I said. She laughed. Full, real, the laugh I had been coming home to for 34 years. One Friday afternoon, a week before school let out for summer, one of the 6th graders, a girl named Destiny, who had been struggling all year with a home situation that was not my business to discuss, stopped me in the hallway. "Mr. Hayward, is it true you were a spy?" I looked at her, 12 years old, backpack half unzipped, expression of the particular intensity of someone who has just learned that the world is larger and stranger than their teachers have been letting on. Where did you hear that? My uncle showed me a video, online. You were at some fancy party, and a lady from the government said you were like a real spy. Operations officer, I said. It's a little different from a spy. Did you, actually do spy stuff? I considered this for a moment. The east hallway was empty. The afternoon sun was coming through the windows at the angle it only does in late May, turning the floors gold. For a long time, I said, and then I decided I'd rather do this. She looked at me like I was not entirely making sense. Why? Because this is real, I said. Out there, everything was complicated. Everything had layers. You couldn't ever just be where you were. Here, I'm just the guy who fixes the lights and makes sure the floors are clean, and when school starts in the morning, everything works. That's the whole job. I like it. She thought about this for a moment. That's kind of cool, I guess. Go home, I said. Your bus is leaving. She ran. I watched her go, backpack bouncing, ponytail swinging, running the way kids run when they have somewhere to be and the whole summer ahead of them. I picked up my broom. Somewhere in Atlanta, Ethan Prescott was reviewing compliance documents and trying to figure out how to rebuild something from the ruins of an evening he had designed to make himself inevitable. I didn't think about him much. He was going to be fine, eventually. He was talented and educated, and he came from the kind of family that knew how to land softly. Someday, if he was lucky, he would understand that what happened at the gala was not something I did to him. It was something he did to himself, in front of 400 people, because he had spent so many years performing contempt in private that he had forgotten it was a performance. I hoped he'd figure that out. I wasn't holding my breath. My daughter was happy. My wife was sleeping well for the first time in years, she told me, because she no longer had to carry a secret that didn't belong to her. Director Walsh's consulting work kept my mind from going soft. And the school was the school, noisy, complicated, occasionally exasperating, full of kids who needed the hallways to be clean, and the lights to work, and the water fountain near the gym to stop making that rattling sound. I had spent 31 years operating in the shadows. I had made decisions that I could not discuss and taken actions that would never appear in any public record, and I had done it because someone had to, and I was the kind of person who could. But you cannot live in the shadows forever without losing something. You come home from that kind of work, and you need to find out if you still know how to just be a person, how to have a conversation that isn't a mission, how to be in a room without cataloging every exit. Sweeping floors taught me that. It gave me back the ordinary, the unimportant, the beautiful, boring, daily weight of a life that doesn't require you to lie to keep it intact. That Ethan had never understood. He had looked at my ordinary life and seen a failure to achieve. He had not understood that I had already achieved more than he could imagine, and I had chosen to set it down. Setting things down takes more strength than picking them up. I put the broom away in the supply closet, turned off the hallway lights, and walked out to the parking lot where Carol was waiting with 2 coffees and the windows down because it was a warm evening in May in Marietta, Georgia, and we were going to drive home with the windows down and not talk about anything important. Sometimes that is the whole point. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Stormborn Vengeance and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? Where are you watching from?